Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Can people make positive changes in their life that really last? Dr. Mark Baker has been trying to answer this question for the past 25 years as a clinical psychologist. To discover the answer, he went on a quest to find people who have changed their lives in the most dramatic ways, ending up in the largest maximum security prison in the United States, located in Angola, Louisiana. Once the most brutal prison in the country, Angola was transformed into one of the most effective sites for rehabilitation in the United States. He uses stories from inside Angola, along with decades of experience as a clinical psychologist, to share with readers the amazing human potential for change and personal growth. Drawing on themes of forgiveness, community, justice, hope, and spirituality, he shows all of us how to change our lives for the better, no matter who we are or what we've done. Dr. Mark Baker has received a PhD in clinical psychology and a master's degree in theology, as well as a certificate in psychodynamic psychotherapy. He serves as the executive director of the Levy Counseling Centers in Pasadena and Santa Monica, California. He's the author of several books, including Jesus, the Greatest Therapist Who Ever Lived, which has more than 2 million copies in print. He's the author of You Can Change and Overcoming Shame, Let Go of Others' Expectations, Embrace God's Acceptance. Dr. Baker joins us on the second Friday of every month at the 12 o'clock hour. You can find more about him at drmarkbaker.com. Here to discuss the psychological and spiritual impacts of what's going on in America today is our dear friend, Dr. Mark Baker. Mark, so great to see you. Welcome to your edition of Revealing the Truth.
Eric, it's always good to be with you. I look forward to our time every month.
So do I. Mark, you and I have discussed shame being at the very core of so many of our responses in relationships, in life, friendships. It seems that the closer we get to one another, the more the layers begin to peel back and people feel comfortable with expressing themselves in a more transparent or overt way, but they're drawing not on the present condition, they're drawing on some framework which has been established way early on in their life, whether or not it was we talk about institutionalized racism, but it's really a grandfather who made comments and had a son who grew up in that environment that made comments, who passed it on to his modern day child that thought that that was the right way to look at things. And it's not an original thought in their life. It's not an original framework for them. It's been artificially inseminated into their psyche. And they hear themselves saying things that I don't think they actually believe.
Right. Or don't fully understand. You're right. We don't fully appreciate the complexity of the human mind. We don't. Trauma, injuries, pain that results in shame and doubts about your self-worth start early in life, and then they get repeated. And they are stored in the emotional part of the brain. So if I had a grandfather who was abusive to me, and then a father who also was similarly abusive to me, I don't think about those thoughts. I don't want to think about those thoughts. So the actual memory of it sort of fades. And I've even had people sit in my office and say, I haven't mentioned his name in years. Like, it doesn't bother me anymore. Well, just because you don't mention his name, just because you don't think the thought, just because you don't put it in language, that's all the left hemisphere of the brain, doesn't mean the right hemisphere of the brain doesn't remember it. And every day it gets triggered. So the emotional part of the brain where injury, hurt, shame, trauma is stored remembers. But it doesn't remember in the same way the language part of the brain does. So I say all that to say, if you're really about institutional racism and you're standing on a street corner and you're angry about it, there's a possibility that some of that anger is coming from this emotional part of your brain and you don't even remember why. You don't know why you're so mad, but you're really mad. and you're going to get out on the street corner and scream at cars as they go by because you know something's very, very wrong and somebody's being abused, and we're going to stop that abuse now. And that's the sad part of what I see, is that people are very engaged in some of these very, very important conversations and extremely emotional and angry about it. And I don't think they're fully aware of where all of their anger is coming from. So they'll make statements like systemic racism, institutional racism. They'll think, well, that's it. That's what I'm mad about. When I look at the anger on their face, I think, well, I think you might be mad about something else too, but you're not able to put it into words. So now you've been given a language to express your anger and your rage and your feeling of injustice and your feeling that someone has been abusive and they need to be stopped. I'm not really sure who it is, but I'm pretty sure it's this vague systemic racism that needs to be stopped. And so what I'm seeing a lot now is people having their trauma revived and they don't know it. And they're having their shame triggered and they don't know it. And they really feel, and they're absolutely convinced something's wrong and it needs to be stopped. And if you try to talk with them about the facts of their argument, well, let's talk about the statistics of the thing that you want to change. That's all fuzzy for them. They don't know what the statistics are and exactly what needs to be changed and what's the law that needs to be changed. Well, I don't know, but I know something needs to be changed and I'm really, really angry about it. So this conversation, as you can tell, then becomes very, very complicated. How do you talk to someone who's really, really mad about something and they can't quite put their finger on what it is and put the language to it, the part that really makes them angry? I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned that we're trying to have a very important political conversation, and it's being fueled by other emotions that are coming from our personal histories that we can't even remember. Very complicated.
Golda Meir made this statement. She was the first female prime minister of Israel. She said, "One cannot and must not try to erase the past merely because it does not fit the present."
Right.
When you think in psychological terms, I can't erase my past. I have to reconcile my past in order for me to live in my present in a healthy way.
Correct.
Just because I have a past that might have been abusive, I might have a past that had that harsh father or that Prussian general grandfather that I had, that I remember hearing the stories about him lining up his children and having them put their hands out to inspect their fingernails to make sure that their hands were clean. And if they weren't, they were severely punished. He did that with his men in the military. When they present arms, it wasn't the present arms. It was hold out your hands, and he as a general would walk down the line and examine the fingernails of the men under his command, the officers under his command. And if they had dirty fingernails, they weren't fit to serve under him, and this was his standard. Well, my father carried that standard into his life. And I know that I heard my father say that I would never treat my children like my father treated me while he was doing the things that his father did. So we have this entrapment, and we want to erase the past. But you and I have talked about a narrative that says, all right, look, our past, like every nation in the world, is stained with blood. Going back into biblical history, hands are stained with blood. The things done during the Crusades, hands stained with blood. The Spanish Inquisition, the Holocaust, the apartheid, hands stained with blood. American slavery, hands stained with blood. Okay, that's our past.
Yes.
Now, in order for me to truly gauge psychologically where I am today, I would come to you and you would establish in our first session a baseline. And you would determine where am I in our initial conversations? You would assess me. You would ask me questions. I would give you answers. And you would glean from that where I am. You might test me in various areas to create a baseline. The baseline may be that I'm living in a delusional state. I'm in a constant state of anger. I have ugly moods, UMS, ugly mood swings. Whatever bipolar tendencies, but not basically chemically bipolar, but tend to be in that spectrum. Don't deal with anger well. Don't deal with conflict well. You're not going to work with me to erase my past. You are actually going to take me on a journey into my past to address the realities of my past so that I can reconcile my past with my present and choose to make different choices.
Right.
Then, when we have our 10th session, our 15th session, our 20th session, you will refer back to the baseline to show me and encourage me, listen, I know you had a flare-up last week, but over the course of the last 12 months, you started out with a flare-up every 3 days on average. We got you to the point of every month on average. Now you've had one flare-up in 9 months. This is incredible progress compared to your baseline history, where you started from to where you are today. So don't let the outburst discourage you. Let us reset the calendar, reset the clock, and let's see what the triggers were. Are they still the same? What fiber is left over from that shame that we still haven't gotten to? And let's open up the wound just a little bit more, clean it out to make sure that the small level of infection that still remains is cleared out so that we can finish the healing process. Should this not be the same approach? It's tried and proven over the course of your clinical psychology career that this is the methodology you use. It was in my psychological training, in my counselor training, that this was the process we used, and it's biblical. Paul talks about it. He says, not that I've accomplished this, but this I do, forgetting what's behind or reconciling what's behind, and not allowing me to gauge everything up, but I press on to the prize waiting for me in the future in Messiah, not dwelling on my past. It didn't work for Lot's wife. Why do we make it a habit of dwelling and dredging up these past transgressions to be a source of weaponized shame as opposed to a process of, listen, we admit America has a shaky foundation. Black Americans have a shaky foundation. One of the largest plantation owners in all of the South was a black plantation owner that owned slaves. Why don't we hear about that in the narrative? It's always white privilege. There were black slave owners. It doesn't make sense that we don't address the fullness of our history, and we're using this shame-based narrative to try to force the changing of the names of football teams, the tearing down of statues that represent our history, the aggression towards somebody. An Amazon driver pulls up to a location to make a delivery. He's accosted, he's pulled out of his truck, and his truck is hijacked. How is that okay?
I have a little bit of a connection problem. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. You've said a lot, and I think it's exactly right. We cannot forget. We want to think we can forget. When you've had these experiences in the past, my patients come to me and they say, I want you to help me stop thinking that way. I want to change my thinking. from toxic thinking to healthy thinking, as if we could go in the brain and erase the history. Once those neural pathways are in the brain, they cannot be erased. What we can do is develop new neural pathways that become more dominant. So what change means is you really never do forget the past, but we can create a new future for you by the renewing of your mind. And if the circumstances are right, you can be triggered to act and think and feel as you did in the past. That can be revived. It doesn't get erased. So the idea that we can erase our past is a fiction. So it raises an interesting question. Why would we even engage in this fiction? That we can tear down monuments as if our past did not exist. Why would we engage in a fiction like that? That we can erase our past as if it didn't happen? Wouldn't we want to remember the past so that we don't repeat it? Wouldn't we want to maybe add a plaque to that monument? That this guy fought for the side of the Civil War that wanted to preserve slavery, and that was an evil institution, and he lost that battle. Wouldn't we want to be proud of having fought that battle and pulled ourselves out of racism and remember it? Why would we do this? So this is where the psychology comes in. You see, I think there's a difference between resentment and righteous indignation. Righteous indignation is the moral anger we feel in the face of injustice. So it is energy to solve a problem. When Paul says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath, he says, be angry but do not sin. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. He's saying anger is not a sin, but be careful, it could be. Anger itself is energy to solve a problem. And righteous indignation is the moral indignation, anger, that any person feels in the face of wrongdoing. Now, there's no shame in that. It is the way God gets angry when things are wrong. There's a moral anger that wants to fix a problem that needs to be fixed. That's different from resentment. Resentment is the feeling I get when someone else has demeaned me, and now I've been caused to doubt my worth in my own mind, and I need to even the scales. Resentment means, okay, I've been hurt by you and put down by you, and caused, and this is important, caused to doubt my own self-worth, and now I need to morally right the scales and make sure everybody knows that you are morally inferior to me, because I have been made to feel morally inferior to you, and the only reason I would engage in that battle is because I now have self-doubt. So, a good example of this is Jesus was demeaned and humiliated. He never wanted to get even. He held no resentments towards anyone. He asked God to forgive the people who were crucifying him. Why would he have no resentment? He never experienced in his own mind any doubt about his self-worth. So there's a human on earth who is perfectly healthy, right? That's our model, our goal, but it's not us. We feel demeaned, and if I feel demeaned, I need to get even with you. So that's resentment. Resentment is the indignation that comes from feeling demeaned and the desire to even the moral scales. So, what does resentment? What's the goal of resentment? That I block out, hide, distract from my own shame. I've been made to feel inferior. I need to hide from that, so I need to put all the focus on how bad you are. You need to be stopped. You need to be put down. Somebody needs to stop you. Somebody needs to tear you down, knock down your monuments, make sure that you are put down so that no one looks at me feeling doubts about myself, my shame, my inferiority that now I'm wrestling with, and I'm angry and feel justified in my anger and tearing you down. I think what we're seeing now is trauma that's being triggered, shame that's being triggered, psychological injuries that are being triggered that people don't even remember. And so they feel this sense of self-righteousness when they see monuments torn down. There's something inside them that says, yeah, that's right. That guy needs to be torn down. America isn't a good place. America has abused me. America has made me feel bad about myself, and that needs to be stopped. And they don't even understand the psychological mechanism that makes them want to do something that makes no sense. Why would you want to erase your past, which cannot be erased? Why would you not want to learn from your past and change it and build a new narrative based on your past? Yes, were morally flawed. They couldn't live up to their own principles, but they came up with those principles that we eventually lived into. We as a nation are still growing into and recognizing the importance of those very principles that they themselves couldn't even live up to. So this poses a very important question for us today. What is our task, and how are we to understand what's going on now? And what is our goal? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to get even? Are we trying to balance the moral scales? We feel like our forefathers were immoral people, so now we need to make sure everyone knows we're superior to them today. Is that what we mean by justice? No justice, no peace. We're trying to establish for everyone that we are morally superior than our forefathers. Is that our goal? I would say that's the wrong goal. I think the goal always has been and still is reconciliation. I think we are called to the ministry of reconciliation, and that's a different goal than getting even. Morally righting the scales, moral justice, the superiority of my morality from my forefathers' morality, those goals are based in resentment. They're based in shame that's unhealed, and their goal is not reconciliation. Reconciliation is the goal of bringing people together, not putting one above the other or putting one below the other. That's a different goal. And I think we have a traumatized country on our hands is what we have. And it's a very complicated conversation as to understand why. Why are we so traumatized? And we need to have that conversation. But I think what we're seeing here is the goal has shifted from reconciliation to power, moral superiority, and justice. We've shifted the conversation, and that conversation will not bring reconciliation. So I think we have some hard conversations to have here about what are we trying to do as a country? What is our conversation that we're trying to have? I think we're mistaken if we think what we're trying to do is prove that we today are morally superior than our ancestors. That's the wrong conversation. That's based in doubts about our own self-worth. Or why else would we need to have that conversation? Why would I need to prove that I'm morally superior than George Washington unless I had doubts about my morality in the first place?
It's as if killing of babies is more moral than owning a slave. We've justified from a society that abortion is an acceptable practice to many, and that's murder. Now, I want to kind of reframe this a little bit. After World War II, immediately after World War II, were the Nuremberg Trials. And those who were committing the atrocities were brought to justice. They were tried, they were convicted, they were sentenced. It was an immediate response to the atrocity. 1865, Emancipation Proclamation. Okay, slaves are set free. Years later, they're now given the vote. We now have the civil rights movement of the 60s. We don't put because the country was so divided amongst itself, I don't recall there being trials like Nuremberg, because it wasn't a systemic, it was a divide. The divide was resolved. There was a reunification of the states. We became the United States of America. No longer were we separated. The divide between the North and the South was now reconciled, and there was no real call for something on the order of the Nuremberg Trials, because there was an equal amount on either side of this issue. In Nazi Germany, there was a band not representing the significant populations, but there was an organized group of the SS and the Nazis who were engaged in these activities and were brought to trial for them under due process. You committed these crimes. This was what happened. Africa's response to apartheid was to elect Nelson Mandela, to elevate someone who would advocate, and there were people brought to justice in the apartheid nations who committed these genocides. And there's still ongoing genocides and still ongoing, right? In America today, there is no slavery. So we are not continuing perpetuating something that we determined to be not a representation of all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, those among those being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We've now legislated the Equality Acts and said as a nation we're going to legislate, and this is going to be our standard as a nation. So if we did not try people in a due process of crimes committed against humanity for enslavement, then 150 or 155 years later, why are we retrying this matter as if it happened in contemporary times, when we have a framework of reference that we know about justice? Right? Now, this did not justify the murder of 6 million of my people and 4 million Christians on top of it. It brought justice to those that were who committed those crimes. And still today, there are those who hid out and are being discovered that were guards in the SS, in the camps that hid out in Ohio and were found out, and they were brought to trial. There's no exemption from that. That's still modern history. It's like my modern lifetime history. But we're not dealing with that in this context. We're now equating a new social construct and applying something that did not happen and retrying it in the court of public opinion 155 years later. And that to me is, and I'm going to throw this out there, that what I see is a psychological condition, it's a psychiatric condition called folie à deux. Right, you're familiar with it. Okay? There's actually a vineyard in California called folie à deux that uses a Rorschach ink blot as their label. Love the couple, love their story. But this is a fantasy shared by two, and I think we're playing out a fantasy. That you can go back and right the wrong of the past by putting it on trial today. But it's double jeopardy.
Right.
We can't be tried for something a second time. It was found to be unlawful. It was found to be immoral. It was found to be un-American, and therefore it was tried and settled.
Right.
What is it that causes people, and this is the core of overcoming shame, what causes people to not allow themselves to get out of this cyclical pattern of never being able to let go?
Right.
And to have and if this is about a forward movement to reconciliation, why are we not addressing the psychology of this movement, not just of Black Lives Matter, but Antifa, the psychology of this anarchist, Marxist, and Marxism was put on trial in the former Soviet Union, and we saw and heard the words of Ronald Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall.
Right.
It was tried, it was resolved, it was proven to be not healthy for the former states of the Soviet Union. They now have independent countries with independent governments. As much as Vladimir Putin would like to go back, he's not able to pull them back. So if we look in the world, in world history, what causes a people, a person, and then a group of people, then a particular part of society, a particular cultural demographic group, to weigh into the constant retrying of something because they don't feel a sense of justice was appropriately adjudicated 155 years ago.
I think there are good psychological reasons for that I think we all need to talk about.
Okay, I want to stop there, and I want you to collect your thoughts about the answer to that from a psychological reason while we go to break. We're talking with Dr. Mark Baker, author of Overcoming Shame, a powerful book that really clearly identifies the shame as being when we look at the manifestation of sin, sin has a root, and that root is in something in you. You can say, like Flip Wilson, the devil made me do it, but the devil is in that center of you that is so attached to the past that it cannot embrace the present. It is hidden. It is insidious. It is not intentional. You are being driven by something that's unseen, but can be made seen and made known and be named, and you have authority over it to name it, take control of it, to release yourself from the bondage of it. And this is a shame center. This is at the core of all these things that we're talking about. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to ask Dr. Mark Baker to answer why we keep revisiting something that we will not allow resolution, reconciliation, and a plan to move past the shame of a 155-year-old practice and reconcile it and have a plan for moving forward. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, and Sean Tabbitt for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Mark Baker at drmarkbaker.com, author of the book Overcoming Shame, talking about what's going on in America today and what's at the very core of this movement that's taking to our streets, consuming our communities, bringing out violent responses to people, trying to talk about a narrative that's over 155 years old. Welcome back to the program.
Good to be with you, Eric. I think this is really an important conversation for us to continue to try to have, and it's so volatile. People get emotional very, very quickly on all aspects of this conversation. So hopefully we can try to make some sense of it. I think in order to understand what's going on, we have to understand forgiveness and reconciliation. Those are important constructs. I believe it is the way through. That's what we've learned in South Africa, that we've learned in Angola, Africa, with other places who have had to deal with racial reconciliation issues. They've had to really take a hard look at what reconciliation means. Now, forgiveness, we know, is something that's a decision of the heart. I can forgive you and you can never know about it. I'm deciding not to return hurt for hurt. Forgiveness is a decision to surrender my resentment of you. If you have done something to insult me or offend me or demean me, it's my decision not to enter into moral competition with you anymore. I'm not going to get even. I'm not going to put you down. I'm simply going to surrender my right to resentment and make the decision to no longer even attempt to hurt you. That's forgiveness. So forgiveness is something you can do in your own heart. Reconciliation is a deeper level of forgiveness. Reconciliation requires a process that both parties must enter into. Reconciliation is not something I can do on my own. You have to participate in that process. And reconciliation requires three things. It requires, number one, truthfulness. We have to both be honest about what has happened. What are the true feelings underneath what has happened? Yes, you hurt me, but did you know that I felt demeaned? Yes, you did that, but did you know how much shame I felt because you did that? Yes, you did that, but did you know how betrayed I felt? And can you be honest about your motivations for doing what you did to me? Truthfulness is absolutely essential. There is no reconciliation unless we can have an honest conversation about what happened and an ownership then of the pain that's been caused. The second step is repentance. Now, repentance is metanoia. It means change of mind. It means I was seeing things one way. I've changed my mind. I see it differently. So that's an important part of the process, where with forgiveness, it's not even really required. I can forgive you and you've never changed your mind. You have no new insight. You have no new understanding of me, and I can forgive you. But to be reconciled to you, we have to enter into this dialogical process where there's a change of mind on your part, where I share to you, when you said that to me, I felt so humiliated. I felt so put down and so beneath you. And your change of mind would go, I never knew that. I didn't know that. I thought you just didn't like me. And I said what I said because I felt like you didn't like me, and so I didn't like you. I had no idea that you felt that I was being superior to you. That's change of mind. That's essential for the reconciliation process, for us both to see we have new insight. We've got psychologically a change of mind. I was going in one direction. I've changed my mind. I'm going in a new direction. That then opens up for the third process of reconciliation, which now allows for a mutual understanding of our pain, where I get what you did and why you did it, and you get how I feel because of it in a new way that you didn't have before this conversation, and I understand something about you that I didn't have before this conversation. So there's your narrative and my narrative, your self-reflection, my self-reflection. We've now been honest about that. There's been a change of mind, a new insight into this injury between the two of us, and we write a new narrative that comes out of this, out of our mutual understanding of pain. I get how you were hurt, and you said the things you said to me out of hurt, and now you get exactly how I was hurt by what you did, and you have that new insight. That then produces now a level of forgiveness that transcends just the decision not to return hurt for hurt, which is one-sided. This is two-sided. Reconciliation is two-sided, where now we are brought together again. See, I can forgive you, but really feel awkward around you every time I see you. That means I'm not reconciled to you. But to reconciliation now, we welcome each other into each other's presence because there's a new level of understanding of pain that allows us to resolve on the deepest level the insults, the injuries, that allows for a new narrative, a new way of living together going forward. This is the process that I think resolves racial reconciliation. And that requires an honesty, a repentance, a change of mind, and now a mutual understanding of the pain that's been caused. Now, what stands in the way of this process? Why is it that we wouldn't welcome this process? And that sounds so great. Let's resolve our injuries and let's live together in harmony and live together feeling we understand each other and we get each other. The thing that blocks forgiveness and blocks reconciliation is resentment. And resentment is the feeling that I have been demeaned by you and I now doubt my own worth because of what you've done in my own mind. And I don't want to look at that. I don't want anyone to even mention it because now I feel morally less than you. And my resentment causes me to want to only focus on what you did that's wrong and have you pay for that. Because I don't want to examine my own heart and say, you know what, I actually do think I'm less, and you treating me like less has confirmed it for me. And I think the problem in our dialogue today is that there are certain, maybe well-intended forces in our culture today that continue to make African Americans feel less than. They're being treated as though they're less than. They're being told they don't have the ability to compete in academia, so we're going to have to give them special exemptions. They're being told they can't compete in business, so we're going to have to give them special exemptions. They're being told they can't lift themselves out of poverty, so we're going to pay them to live in poverty. Oh, and by the way, if you've got a father in the home, we're not going to pay you. And so we've set up these systems to continue to make them believe they are inferior. And so now their rage comes out of resentment over things that are decades and decades old that are no longer the issue. We no longer have any legally institutionalized racism. It is against the law. It's not there. And yet you hear it every day. There's institutional racism. There's systemic racism. And why are people so convinced? It's because of this resentment that no longer wants reconciliation, never did want reconciliation. Resentment wants the other to be punished. Resentment wants us to tear down monuments. Resentment really looks at the face of authority and says, you have no moral authority because you're bad and I need to make everyone see how bad you are. That resentment blocks reconciliation. And I hear this now in the public forum where unfortunately in attempts for racial reconciliation, I will hear African Americans say, because you're white, you cannot understand me. Disqualified from reconciliation. There can be no reconciliation because there can be no mutual understanding of pain because of the color of your skin. So you see how the conversation has shifted. Reconciliation would have to have an open possibility for a mutual understanding of pain. That's required for reconciliation. And if I'm saying from the get-go, no, the color of your skin prohibits you from understanding me, therefore there can be no mutual understanding of pain, therefore there can be no reconciliation. I have to have another goal. Now my goal is power. I want justice, which is really power. I want things. I want special privileges. I need to be angry because I need everyone to know that you're morally inferior to me because of the color of your skin, because of what's happening. It has happened and happening in our culture, and I'm stuck. I can't get reconciliation because I can't believe there is ever a possibility of the mutual understanding of pain. We're in a terrible, terrible dilemma here. And I think it's just been since the 60s, since we had Martin Luther King's very effective change in legislation. And we had the Civil Rights Act, we had the Voters' Rights Act, we had the Fair Housing Acts, the Civil Rights Act, all in the 60s, which legally changed racism. And at the same time, we had the women's rights movement, who was saying the same thing. They were saying, oh, institutionally, we've been held as inferior people. We've only been allowed to vote for 40 years. So this needs to change. You can't keep treating us like second-class citizens. And at the same time, we had the Vietnam War, where we had a whole group of people saying, no, our government has lied to us. This is not a moral war. You're telling us that this is for national security. It's not. And so we had these institutional things that all came together at the same time. And we were discovering that our industrial complex was destroying our environment at the same time. And so the moral authority of our country was questioned for the first time. I remember talking to my father when it was time for me to sign up for the draft. And I said to him, I think I'm going to have to sign up as a conscientious objector. I mean, I've looked at this, I've thought about this, I've prayed about this. I can't see this as a moral thing. He called me a coward to my face because he believed in God and country. The moral authority of the country was unquestionable to him because that generation believed in God and country in a way that there was no question. But from the 60s on, we began to question that. We began to say, well, wait a minute, I'm not so sure the country does always do the right thing. And here are some very, very big examples all at the same time that were happening. So from that time on, why are we still arguing over things we resolved in the 60s? It's because the children raised in the last 50 years, no longer believe in the moral authority of our country. It's been shaken, and they grew up to become teachers, and then they taught their students who are now standing on street corners, really angry and mad about what? That they feel demeaned and lied to, that they feel insulted, they feel offended and traumatized by living in a country that lied to them. And so if they find out that their forefathers were imperfect, that they believed in all men are created equal, but they owned slaves, well, then they're liars. And so I'm angry that I feel lied to, I feel deceived, and that's a form of trauma when you lie to children. And so they're now standing on street corners enraged, and they're not really exactly sure why, other than they know that the authority in our country has no moral authority. And they feel frightened, and they're not certain about their future at all because they're stuck in resentment. You lied to me, and I resent you for lying to me. I feel frightened, and I feel injured by it. And we've lost our goal of reconciliation. Martin Luther King's goal was reconciliation. The women's right, initially, their goal was reconciliation. The goal was for us to resolve the problem. That's righteous indignation. That's a good thing. We had that in the 60s. We've lost that. Now what we have now is a commitment to resentment, to tearing things down, to not resolving and reconciling, but looking for justice and power in its place because we feel frightened and we feel this feeling of being lied to and which is demeaning that they don't know what the answer is to. When I saw several people interviewed on the streets here, the newscasters went up to them when they were protesting, when they were out by the thousands, by the way, protesting. A newscaster went up to, it was about 5 different people. She went up to and said, okay, and what changes are you looking for? None of them had an answer. They said things like, well, I don't know, I'm just doing my part. Or that's for the legislators, or that's for other people to decide. I just need to do my part. And that said to me, okay, you're really angry, you're really resentful, and you can't even tell me why. You can't even say what it is. What's the legal change you want to make? They can't tell you. They just know that they feel resentful, and somebody needs to be brought down because of it. We have a serious problem I think we need to address, and the root here is spiritual and psychological.
This is almost a gang mentality that says that we just want to be the gang. Our gang is better than your gang. We want to take turf. We're not looking to come up with progressive programs for reconciliation. In the Jewish community, we created the Simon Wiesenthal Center. We said we're going to fight anti-Semitism with education and with awareness and with community activism, but not activism, philanthropy. You want good surgery, go to Mount Sinai Hospital. Okay? We're going to build you a great hospital. And that's going to change. When that Jewish doctor saves your life, we're going to win your support as a people, one heart surgery at a time.
Right.
You win one heart at a time.
Right.
You can hate the Jewish people, but I'll tell you what, you get a diagnosis of cancer, you get a diagnosis of heart disease, okay, you're going to find a Jewish doctor. Okay? You're gonna feel great when we want to introduce you to Dr. Cohen. Dr. Cohen, oh, thank God that God himself has sent me Dr. Cohen. We don't have a new Bill of Rights. We don't have somebody proposing if you will meet us on these points. Here's our agenda. We want the history books to be changed, not to change history, but to update our view and to make a clearer message of what a democratic republic is. That what is equality? Let's give a better definition to equality, not just rest on all men are created equal. What does that mean? Okay. Well, we have changed the Bill of Rights. We have amended. We have amendments to the Constitution that change that to race, religion, color, national origin, sexual preference. We legislated that. Now, if there are instances, we should have a court system like the World Court, like The Hague, where if you want to bring an accusation of a crime against humanity, if there is an actual crime that is being committed by a police department or law enforcement across the United States has a policy which is being enforced, which is racial profiling, and that the incidence of racial profiling outside of communities that are, I can't racially profile 100% black community. You just can't, you can't accuse me of racial profiling when the whole community is black. Okay? If there's a robbery and it was committed by a black man, I can't be caught. You can't say I'm racial profiling because I pulled over every 22-year-old, 6-foot-tall black man in that neighborhood that's 100% black. Right. Let's get real about some things here that say that there's not a systemic problem. There are problems, and there are training problems. All right, so you want new police academies. So then let's have the organization of police academy directors, like we have chancellors of universities. Let's get them together. Let's take a look at the curriculum. Let's come up with a curriculum which is taught by an inner city African American that says these are the areas of sensitivity. These are the things you need to be aware of. These are the things we have a problem with, and bring up reconciliation so that we can move forward. Right. This constantly punching me in the face because I have a white face is just going to turn my face black and blue. It will eventually return back to a white face. You have not accomplished anything by beating me up repeatedly for the exact same thing that I have no control over. Let's identify the issues and come up with a plan. And that's my big challenge in all this, is I hear a lot of noise, but I hear nobody come up with actionable items to bring about a solution to reconcile this problem, take it off the streets. If it's academia, which I think it is, we need to change the narrative. If it's law enforcement and criminal justice, we need to change the narrative. If we need to have different sentencing guidelines, we need to change the narrative. If we need, there's legislation and laws, but there is a way to do it which is right and just in this environment, which is based on a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. You take up your mantle of getting the vote, getting the organization, getting the political sway. You have large communities, and you have benefactors, not agitator benefactors, but you have the Ben Carsons, and you have the black leaders, not the Fortune 500 presidents. They're saying, I'll commit $100 million to this initiative. We'll create an institute. This is why the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, how can you have an organization that continues to promote a racially divided organization? Why is this not the National Association for the Advancement of American People, the NAAAP? Why do we continue to segregate when we're talking about humanity? And this narrative of segregation and of hyphenation and of identifying separate groups by color says to me, you keep telling me you want me to be colorblind, but all you make me look at is color. You keep hitting me with a black baseball bat, okay?
Right.
Hitting me with a baseball bat's enough, but you've ensured me that I know that the baseball bat is black. Okay?
Resentment blocks reconciliation. Resentment blocks reconciliation.
Amen. And that's the root of it. And we're going to continue this discussion the next time we get back together, because it may be that you and I create a psychological manifesto that we put out there that just says that the way to reconcile this is to just sit down together and talk about what do you want to change and how can we do that, and using the same principles that we use in psychological counseling. This is because this is a psychological issue. This is the psyche of America, and it's rooted in shame of our past. The people that didn't experience it, they weren't there, they weren't a party to it, and I continue to be judged by the behavior of people I'm not even related to. I never knew, and it's like they asked me about where was I when Kennedy got shot. I say, am I a suspect?
Why do you keep asking?
Why do you keep asking me? All right? Am I a suspect? Where were you during 9/11? Am I a suspect? So, Dr. Mark Baker, it is always great. It's always passionate. And you and I just want to bring healing. That's
Amen.
all we want, is to bring healing to a nation, one person at a time, one soul at a time, to let them know of the love and the mercy that God has for them in their life. And I thank you for always being faithful to that message, always. God bless you, my friend, and thank you for being with us.
God bless you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.